Hello, I'm Jeffrey Goodman. Welcome to the Musicians Round Table. Beautiful. So they're going to put down their instruments and we'll begin the interview. Ben, could you introduce and discuss the piece that you guys just played?
Yes, that was a piece called A Plain Song, which is probably based on a religious piece, but this is like a sort of an entabulation of a religious piece by Thomas Robinson from the School of Music 1603, which is one of the great teaching aids and resources from the early 17th century, in which there are lots of interesting words of advice, such as how high you should tune the first string. Thomas Robinson thought you should tune it as high as you can until just before it breaks. So there's a word of advice for all young students out there. It's lovely to be here, Jeffrey. Lovely to see you again.
Indeed.
And of course, you've met my dear friend Andrea Dieci already. We spoke earlier on, and he's staying with me in my home in deepest, darkest Cornwall in the southwest of the UK. And we're doing some concerts, this week.
It's lovely to be here.
Absolutely. So I see that you're going to be giving 4 concerts later this week. I've never seen a recital devoted exclusively to lute duets, and these are all from the Elizabethan period. Could you guys discuss how this came about, how you met each other and began this amazing project?
Well, we've known each other a long time. I'm sure Andrea will say too long. No. We've known each other about 15 years now. We first met on a concert tour, a fortuitous concert tour in Poland back in 2001, and we shared a house together. We were using the same agency, was finding us some concerts, and we shared some concerts. I think I'm sure we even did a television recorded thing from a concert.
Remember.
Yeah, he does so many big concerts, he doesn't remember that. And we sort of became good friends very quickly. It was quite odd because we're very different personality-wise in some ways, but then we're sort of like yin and yang, I think. We fit together really well. What I'm lacking, he certainly has. I don't think Andrea lacks very much, but perhaps my sort of extroverted nature and his more quiet, reserved nature also work well together. So we've known each other a long time.
Compensation.
Well, part of
the BBC, we did a BBC radio thing earlier on. The lady afterwards, she said, you're quite a double act, you two. So I think we're like Laurel and Hardy, and you can tell who's the thin one.
Well, I'm particularly fascinated, Andrea, about how you approach this music as a classical guitarist. This is lute music. And could you share a bit of your background with lute, tablature, and so forth?
Yes, actually my first teacher when I was studying in Milan at the conservatoire there, he was a lute player. So I met him when I was 15, and he immediately introduced me to reading lute tablature and to transcribing it for the guitar. And also, he gave me a lot of insight about the style of the music of this period. So I was used to play it, listening more to lute players than guitar players. And this stayed with me for a long time. I mean, as a guitarist, I love this music, but I don't like to play the solo pieces from the Renaissance period on the guitar. I've played many, of course. I've played Doland and Francesco da Milano and many more pieces, but actually I like them better on lute than on the guitar. But still, I can read the tablature, and there is a really huge repertoire to play and to discover. And when Ben told me about this project, this was last year, I think. I was in Cornwall for some solo concerts, and one day we played through a couple of pieces just for fun, and he told me about this project. There's a collection of lute duets that he was working on, and it sounded like an opportunity to me to play something new, something that I love, and in a new way, because I play a guitar, in this case, which is slightly transformed, as the tuning is half a tone higher than usual. So the first string is F instead of E. And Ben plays this lutar, which is a kind of hybrid between a lute and the guitar. And usually he plays in F sharp, but this time he had to lower it on my suggestion to F. So
it was a good suggestion, in fact.
Yes, we meet in the middle. And I think this way you can keep the flavor of the music very well. This doesn't sound like a true guitar anymore. It's more towards the lute, and the lutar goes towards the guitar. And the music itself was a wonderful discovery, really beautiful pieces. And I'm having a really great time.
I have to say that, by the way, it was such a beautiful performance. We have an extraordinary technology that's very much in its initial stages that allows me to be in Los Angeles and you guys in England, and we can have this video chat and you can play the guitar and the lute. So the sound quality that you're going to hear is objectively going to be much better, hopefully, a few years down the line when the technical guys get their act together and realize that important musicians want to play and do this live kind of thing that we're doing here. My experience from Los Angeles, listening very carefully to the broadcast from Cornwall just now, is that these two instruments make an exquisite combination of sound. I'm feeling very deprived a bit that I won't be able to see your live performances, but it's an extraordinary blending of the acoustic possibilities. It sounds old like the lute, but it has so much of the nuance of what a classical guitar can do. But I think that the music is thriving under the blending of these two. So this is an extraordinary thing that's going on there. I wanted to, if I may, do what is called a screen share, and I have a few images from your upcoming tour that I'm going to place on screen. I'll say just a few words about it, each one, and then we'll go back to Ben and Andrea. So here you see the poster for their Saturday night concert, and this gives some of the information. this is a bit of, in my view, it's a bit of important music history, because some of these pieces, and Ben will talk about this in a few moments, some of these pieces haven't been played for 400 years. That's a long time to be in buried manuscripts and various other things that Ben, using his extraordinary Sherlock Holmes type of techniques musically, has found this music and brought it back to life. So that's the concert poster. Then this is a book that is going to be published, my understanding is, fairly soon, and it's multi-volumes, and it's going to become, I believe, if I may say, a standard set of volumes in every serious guitarist and lutenist library, because it has never been done before that all of this great stuff has been gathered. So this is the cover of Ben's book. By the way, on the video that we'll put into YouTube after this is done, I'll put in links to Ben's website, Andrea's website, and other things that for people who are going to dig in that they can use. Now, the next image is, this is the concert program, and you can see there are three composers who have names, and the very important anonymous composer. This is anonymous, only existed up until the beginning of the copyright era. After copyright,
I call her anonymous. I think it's the most famous lady composer of all time.
Yes, yes. So you can see this is a fantastic program. I can spend an hour just looking at the spelling of the words, because the titles much better than, for example, minuet or...
Yeah, but you know, there's a story behind that as well, because it was a direct ancestor of mine, Dr. Samuel Johnson, who wrote the first English dictionary. And before he got his mitts on the English language, you could spell things as you liked. So it's kind of my family's fault. I'm sorry.
Yes. So then here is an example of the Thomas Robinson piece, A Toy. This is an utter delight to play on guitar, two guitars or two good instruments. And this is just a graphic example of the very, very nice layout that Ben and his publisher have done. This is, I believe, guitar one, lute one, excuse my lapse there. And this is the second guitar, and you can see that this is more chordally oriented. So,
no, in fact, in this piece, so what happens is the treble on the one piece, on the one instrument, is repeated on the other instrument a few bars later on. So, in fact, they're exactly equal on this piece.
Yes, that's something that I think is fantastic. So those are some of the elements that surround the upcoming performance. And Ben, could you say a word about some of your Sherlock Holmes type of adventures in finding this music and bringing it together for you guys to play, and then, of course, to share it with people, both in your performances, upcoming recordings, and also in the books?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know me, Jeffrey. I mean, I don't say a word. I say a whole paragraph when I should say a word. But the story is that 18 months ago, I signed up with Peacock Press, who are a UK-based publisher who specialize in early music. And they asked me to produce a collection of lute music. And this 5 volumes, including the editorial volume, 5-volume box set of English lute duets, which pretty much covers every lute duet written in England, written down between 1580 and sort of 1620. This was one big project. It was one of the reasons I didn't go to sleep for several nights in a row back in February. I spent days and nights sweating blood and tears trying to get the whole thing sorted in time. I went back to all the original handwritten manuscripts. There are references to all the famous pieces are very easy to find, but there were a lot of pieces that were more obscure. And a lot of the time there were incidences where, for example, pieces might be described as being a consort piece, like the Delight Pavan, the version that we're using in this publication by John Johnson, existed as a treble. And while there were other versions of the piece, there was a simple, quite chordal version which didn't have the depth that you could see was evident in the original composition. It was just described as a consort piece and therefore not probably part of the duet repertoire. And I found some interesting things. For example, that in this one case, John Johnson had been described as being one of the three lutes in Elizabeth I's court. And this has been often misinterpreted as being one of the three lutanists, which is it kind of, when you look at it in realistic terms, it's kind of crazy. You imagine this entire vibrant court with hundreds of people, and there are three lutanists. I mean, really? We ended up deciding if this meant, and I had evidence to back it up, that there were three kinds of size of lute, of which he was one of the players of one of these three sizes of lute. And so the Delight Pavin, in fact, existed, but in different keys with settings for different sized instruments. So obviously the tuning of the lutes was different depending on the size. If you, in this case, I found a part that was obviously a sort of ground part, but in the wrong key, and transcribed it, and hey presto, it fit like a glove. We had suddenly a duet that hadn't been played for 400 years sitting in front of me, being played on a sort of electronic MIDI file. And nonetheless, the hairs are standing up on the back of my neck as I realised that we've actually found a sort of holy grail. I think the Delight Pavin, I have to say, we played. When did you turn up? When did you arrive? You arrived Sunday. Yeah, you arrived in the middle of the Grand Prix. Yes. Yeah. Because I missed the motor racing because Andrea came, and it's the only time I didn't complain because of that. Yeah, you arrived on Sunday. I think Sunday evening, it was the first after we'd eaten, we had a first rehearsal. We played this through, and I said to him at the time, "Why was no one recording this first time we played this piece, which had not been heard for 400 years? Because it was no perfect. It was ridiculous. It was better than we'll ever play it in concert." And we played it the first time in 400 years it had been heard by anyone. The person who heard it was Charlotte, my partner. She was the one person in 400 years who's heard this piece played, wow. Who's not performing it. So she's a very lucky lady. And there are various pieces where I had to sometimes write, in fact, grounds based on the obvious demands of the treble. There were times when I spent days arguing with myself about whether I should be looking to be as authentic as possible with the ground, whether I should be looking to show this is my idea is one possibility of a ground, or how do you decide? A piece of music that hasn't been played for so many 100 years, and the responsibility is on my shoulders to make it part of modern repertoire. And this was literally, I had sleepless nights over it. And I ended up thinking that it was a good idea to follow the keys, to follow the ideas that the composer of the day would have followed, but possibly in some cases put a modern slant. I'm not trying to pretend that when I've had to write a ground, I'm not pretending I didn't. You know what I mean? Because you can't pretend. The reconstruction and sometimes rewriting of grounds was the most difficult part, because I wanted to make it something that people wanted to play, but something that's relevant in the modern concert hall but something that would also fit really nicely around what had already been presented to the general public 400 years ago. And the reason the grounds didn't exist was probably quite simply that people knew them so well, they didn't have to write them down. And we have a tradition in Western Europe of a written history. If we were in some parts of the world, like in the Pacific Islands and so on, where you have like a vocal tradition, the Native Americans in your country talk about sharing dreams with their ancestors. Well, I think we kind of share the same dreams here, but not in a physical way. We need them written down so we can look back wistfully on the way things were. And we recognize things from the past that we would like in our current lives. And if you have that, you can write the music that goes along with it. If you don't have that, then you're struggling a little more. But I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. I'm stuck in the 17th century, so for me, it's no problem.
I wonder, Andrea, if you have this experience that I've had for my whole life as a guitarist, and that is this. Regarding editions of even Baroque music, certainly Renaissance music, it is really difficult to find editions that you can rely on that have been produced by people who have
I absolutely agree.
Superb scholarship, but who are musicians and players, so they can sort through things in such a way that they can be presented to us.
This is a problem, yes. I feel this all the time when I teach my students. For instance, with Bach so-called lute pieces, which actually were not lute pieces.
They
Most
were.
of them.
They certainly were. You haven't read the introduction to any of my Bach. We'll talk about this later. I think we don't want to embarrass Jeffrey by having a big argument.
By the way, I think most of the modern editions are not really reliable because there is I think a lack of sense of style.
Understanding of the way
transcriptions are made. There are some things that Bach would never have done, and you find them in these editions all the time. And also the way the slurs are used is absolutely distant from the common practice on plucked instrument at that time. And when I play as a guitarist, I think the most logical thing is to refer to the most similar instrument, to the guitar. And sometimes I see players trying to imitate the harpsichord, which sounds quite strange to me. I mean, guitar is a different instrument, and we have a lot of music from Weiss, for instance, which could be a good reference to learn about the style, about the way music was played at that time. We just have to make the effort of reading this music from the tablatures, which are not so difficult, by the way, and try to understand more and better. And this way we can make a better idea of the style of the period. And this is not because we have to play like Weiss, which is possible. We have no recordings from that time. But I think the best thing to be correct with the music, to respect the music, is to understand it in the best possible way, in depth.
I think you're right. I disagree with you on one thing, and that is to use Weiss as a reference point, because Weiss was very much a one-off, and I don't say that lightly, because we can say that about all our favorite composers. But as Jeffrey knows, I have a bit of a thing about Sylvius Leopold Weiss. He's kind of my hero of Baroque, in Baroque music, even more so than
I
Bach.
mentioned Weiss because he's the closest to Bach that I was talking about.
Yeah. And of course, with the fact that they knew each other as well,
Yes.
this means there's some kind of common ground, a bit like with you and me. Hey, I'm comparing us to Weiss and Bach now. How cool is that? But I think who's Bach? I'm not sure. I have the hair.
You look more like Bach.
You really? I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not. I think with Weiss, the one thing I realized when I was doing the edition of Weiss, which I happened to have, in fact, fortuitously, I as I dropped things all over the floor. And my edition of Weiss, when I did this edition of Weiss sonatas, one thing I looked at, which was really concerning to me when I'm trying to transcribe from Baroque tuning to Renaissance tuning, which is very similar to transcribing for guitar in many ways, but with the added basses, was what's happening with the slurs. And it immediately became apparent to me that the Weiss was obviously, from the reports, he was a bit of a showman. And just the fact that he only had one piece of his own published in his lifetime, he kept it all very private and secret because he wanted to be the performer of Weiss. People would go to see the music because he was the performer, not anybody else. I looked at the way the slurring sort of hangs in the music, and it was just, in fact, for convenience. Weiss was a convenience man. He used slurs for speed and precision, and obviously, if you're as you know, if you're a good heavy metal lead guitarist and you use, they don't even call them slurs, but if you use this kind of style, you can be so much faster than I and M. It seemed to me that he stood out as being maybe different from a lot of the other composers of the time for using this just for convenience.
My idea is that the slurs were used also to create variety in articulation, which is something that guitarists today don't look for. They look for quite regular playing in Baroque music.
I think when they're playing Bach, it's really a problem for modern guitarists.
Variety in articulation was one of the bases in Baroque taste, I think, and not only in music, but variety. If you think about architecture, you don't have only straight lines.
Exactly. You have the curves and shapes. Yeah,
and the unpredictability of the slurs, of the lines, is something that should always be considered, I think.
I was very careful. In case my theory was wrong, I actually kept 95% of the slurs, the same as Weiss did in the Renaissance.
But again, I think slurs go with the tuning.
I think very much so, but also to the position that you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Different tuning means different slurs.
And that's why the Weiss in Renaissance tuning is such hell to play. Because you're for something that requires two open strings on a Baroque lute, you're talking about a gap between the 3rd and 7th fret, a stretch, and as a regular thing on a Renaissance lute. This is, I'm sort of downselling my own book here, but I wouldn't recommend it for the beginner,
No, me neither.
You would recommend it for the advanced player. Yes, Ben's edition,
of course.
What comes to mind?
You were there, Jeffrey. I'm sorry.
What comes to mind, because I completely agree with it, Andrea was saying regarding the guitarists, that I haven't looked this up, but I was told that the word Baroque refers to a kind of pearl.
Misshapen pearl.
That is misshapen. That is imperfect and not completely regular.
I think this is from a review, isn't it? From a Rameau play or something where they were talking about the music in the play, and this comes from a long time. Really, I think 18 something, early 19th century when the term was first used. But it was in a review, a less than positive review of a Rameau play or some kind of thing where there was a lot of music. Yeah, misshapen pearl. You're quite right. Yeah, which I must tell you, I misread the first time I read this. I thought it was a misshapen pear, and it was only somebody pointed out you've missed an L off there. I was like, well, most pears are kind of strange shapes anyway. So
I wanted to just interject one thing for if people are listening and wish to submit a question, you can click, there's a place on the YouTube screen where you can write a question, and hopefully we may be able to get to some of them. So I think along the lines of what you're saying, could you both talk about how you have gone about rehearsing and putting this music together that is so unique.
I got this music from Ben about a couple of months ago, and it was quite a big amount of sheets.
The biggest email ever.
Yes. So I had to read the whole thing throughout, and since it was in tablature, I am familiar with tablature, but not as much as notation. So it was quite a slow process for me. And since we live in different countries, the first thing was to learn my part, of course. And so I put some fingerings down, some ideas, try to clarify the rhythmical patterns, because in tablature it's different than notation. So I try to arrive here with my pieces, my parts ready as possible. And then we started practicing Sunday evening. It was very interesting because I think it was very good at once on the first rehearsal. Very nice feeling of similar musical ideas and good blend from the beginning. And then we started discussing about the character, the speed of pieces, about possible repetition of sections. And he told me many useful things to understand better, because of course he knows much more than I do about this music. So I'm also learning a lot. And basically that's it. And we have fun, and we
and some
get
wine,
some
occasionally
ideas.
some Cornish ale, and I think for the viewers it might be interesting to hear both sides of the same story, and then put it together like some kind of Hitchcock novel. For me, the biggest problem was trying to work out, because I know this music. I don't know every piece intimately to play, but I first performed Concert of Lute Duets back in '89, when I was only 342 years old. And I found that the idea for me of Andrea just learning some parts that I already knew was unsatisfactory. So having got the book together, I wanted to be pushed musically. I wanted to feel the pain he was going to feel when he saw how many flags there can be on a piece of English lute music. And so rather than just look at pieces, I could have played 3 concerts worth of repertoire from memory of this kind of music. I wanted to play music also that I didn't know, and that was new to us both, so that we could explore it together. So I worked out, I think I sent you 30 pieces, of which we had to work out 20 for the program. And then a few weeks later, we sort of discussed what are the pieces that we like best, and we kind of like the same pieces best. And some of those I already knew, but a lot of them I didn't. And this is unfortunately the program as it stands. I didn't know. I probably still don't know a lot of these pieces. And then it was about practicing them and thinking, what would Andrea do? I've heard Andrea in concert. I can't count how many times. 20 times, maybe altogether. In Poland, in this country, in Italy, maybe more times than that. And so I know he's playing very well. And a lot of it was about, we're going to agree on the way to approach this music. And I knew we would. And it was about finding pieces that would show different characteristics of Renaissance lute, not just to aficionados, people who already go to the concerts. If you're attracting new people into your concerts, which I have a tendency to do, I don't attract the usual audiences. you want to show them a range of what's possible. And in this program, as I got it together, because I decided the program and then asked Andrea, do you think this is good? I felt that there was a bit of everything. There's the melancholic Delight Pavin. There was the slightly exuberant, joyful Toy for Two by Robinson. There was the continental sound showing the fashion of the day of Richard Allison's Spanish measures. There was the imitation, the playfulness of De la Tromba, imitating the medieval trumpet fanfares on two instruments. The classics, like the flat pavan and the galliard that goes with it. And the pieces that nobody's ever heard before. You know, those, for me, are almost the most special. And so I learned to play these, but it was only on Sunday night. I mean, you know, I played them along with the MIDI files as an accompaniment. Very unsatisfactory because, you know, you look at the MIDI file, it doesn't react. You sort of say, slow down at this point, MIDI file. No, it doesn't do it. You just have to play along in tempo all the time, and it's very unsatisfying. And in the end, I decided this is not the way forward. I'm just going to play this stuff. I'm going to imagine Andrea playing. So I was hearing Andrea playing the other parts in my mind. And then when he came on Sunday, we played for the first time, we played the entire program, every piece twice in a row, and then move on. Little chat about each piece as we go through, move on. The poor guy, he'd had breakfast in Milan, he missed lunch in London, he was there, tea time, we'd had English roast dinner in between. I bring him back, he really wants to go to bed, but he's too polite to say. And I said, all right, let's play all this music. So we played for like 3 hours. He had a really good sleep that night. We went through each piece, and I felt that probably 90% of the music we knew immediately without thinking. We knew how the other would want to play it. And it was the same. The disparity was stuff that we sorted out, in fact, pretty much today. Neither of us understood really our approach to a couple of pieces. We didn't know how we wanted them to be, so we couldn't see how the other person would want them to be either. And then today, it was, in fact, while we were waiting to come in your online e-green room, we sort of discovered our way through a couple of the pieces that we had found a little bit too much of a puzzle just to work out from a sort of mathematical musical point of view. It needed the aesthetics of a situation to make them work. We found that, and now, for the first time, I'm happy about tomorrow. Tomorrow night, oh my God, tomorrow night we have a program. Did you know we're playing tomorrow night? Andrea, in 23 hours, we'll be starting a concert.
Well,
that's actually scary, Jeffrey.
It's a difficult program.
It's hard. Yeah, I was saying earlier, do you know this is one of the hardest programs that I've ever played? And I've been playing a lot of programs.
I didn't expect it to be so hard. The divisions are really difficult.
You can get lost. Just you take your eye off the ball for 1 second. You enjoy the other person's part too much. You're dead.
Especially the Allison pieces.
Oh, do you know, if I could get hold of Allison now, do you know I would do really bad things to him?
So what about Allison? Who was his character?
Richard Allison. Very little is known about him. We don't even know for sure when he was born, and we don't even know when he died. He was born around 1560. He died around 1610. He wrote pieces that had incredible amount of character, but the sound belies the difficulty. I think my favorite of his pieces is the Spanish measures. And in the Renaissance, despite the fact that we were enemies of Spain, and of course, you know, the United Kingdom has been pretty much enemies of everybody over the years, but in the Renaissance, Spain were the real losers in this contest, because we had the Armada up the road from where we are now and so on. The Spanish measures really has an authentic sound of the Spanish courts, despite the fact that we're talking about a time when Spain was a Catholic country, and we were what we call English Catholics, or later on Church of England, and so while you would not be associated with anything Spanish if you wanted to keep your head, writing pieces of music or arranging sounds from Spain was actually considered quite a fashionable thing to do. And the Spanish measures imitate the sound of the Spanish court, which became popular in the time of Henry VIII, when his first wife, of course, came from Spain and brought with her many Spanish musicians and various pieces of music, including, in my opinion, the piece of music called Green Sleeves, which seems very much to be, well, put it this way, I don't know if you know of a piece by de Narvaez called Diferencias sobre Catarme las Fasas.
Of course.
We call this Spanish Green Sleeves. And it seems it's
the same ground.
Yeah, it's the same ground. So if you put this piece, you can put this piece to Green Sleeves very easily. I think that this was probably the origin of Green Sleeves, and that Henry VIII stole it, in the pre-copyright days, made it his own, and hey presto, we have a Henry VIII #1 hit. I'm not arguing with Henry VIII, not with what he could do with an axe, so.
So, I'm sure it's going to be a great set of concerts, that I know. I have one small question, just if you guys could touch lightly on, what are you doing with ornamentation? So, for example, when you have...
You're going to love the answer to this.
Go ahead.
Tell him.
We improvise.
we play, it's different every time. We play it, we think, ornament. Goes here,
and
maybe.
And we try to imitate each other.
Some of these pieces you have imitations, and this is almost becoming a competition now. We were playing the De La Tromba, which is this is a pig of a piece. This makes this is like, imagine playing Requiem del Alhambra with 2 fingers. This is like that, right? The greatest piece ever written for guitar, quote Pat Coldrick, and you imagine playing that with 2 fingers. That's like De La Tromba, and I found that there's this one part where you're imitating each other. You have the trumpet sounds. One instrument plays trumpet sounds, the other's playing ground. The other player then plays the same trumpet sounds. He's coming up with some outrageous, ridiculously outrageous ornament, and I have to then copy this. But I got my own back right at the end of the piece because it swaps around, and then I can do the outrageous improvised ornament, and then it's his turn. So you're doing what I did last interview, aren't you? So we find it's really about how it feels at the time, and this is why the 4 concerts will have the same program, but they will each be very different concerts. Yeah, sure. The places we're playing are 4 very different venues with 4 very different kinds of audience, and 4 very different sizes of audience. And I think that the concerts will be very different because of all these factors. And as we go along through the week, maybe we'll be technically more proficient as we reach the end of the series. But in some ways, we'll also be playing around more, which is more dangerous.
Well, that's the way you answered the question about ornaments was what I kind of hoped. It sounds to me,
yeah.
See if this is a right paraphrase. You guys are doing the ornaments like a poker game. I bet this ornament, and then the other person says, I match your ornament, and now I raise you several other notes.
The poker analogy is very good because years ago, in my more notorious days when I was the wild child, as I was known, of lute music, which I didn't know existed in the 21st, or as it was then 20th centuries. I remember in my early days making more money out of playing cribbage than I did out of music. And I hated cribbage, but I had a natural talent for it. And I loved poker, and I was such a bad poker player. If I had a good hand, I would grin a lot. If I had a bad hand, I would just look so sad. And it's the opposite of what you should be. So I used to make the money at cribbage, lose it at poker, and then go and play some music afterwards and hope I'd get a gig. But yes, this is kind of how we're working it. You're quite right. In many regards, I think this is the Renaissance way: the improvisation, the feeling for the music, the enjoyment. Just the enjoyment. We're just playing this as though it's our every time we play the pieces, it's as though we're playing our last piece ever, and then we have to take everything we have from it.
Well, I think that's it's going to be, I think, a really well-received set of concerts. Clearly, the music is fantastic, and the way you're timing this, that people will be able to find the book and buy it, hopefully get some recordings, if you can make some recordings. It's going to be something that's going to, over time, I think, benefit many people. I think that I just want to thank you both. It's been a fantastic meeting. Somehow we've managed to survive the Google technology and all the various things that make this not the easiest thing to do. But
and I have a bunch of unanswered questions which we didn't get round to, but there's another time.
Another time, absolutely. So here's thanking everybody for doing this, particularly Ben and Andrea, and have a spectacular concert. I think that it's going to be full of very special moments, and it will definitely be memorable for you guys, but also for everybody listening. So let's reconnect again at some point down the road, and I'll say thanks to everybody. This video will come online, and I'll put a notice in Facebook and so forth when it's ready. There's a few things to do with it, but again, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lovely to be here.